Okay, we're going to go to section 1.3 and we're going to talk about deduction and induction. And basically what those two words refer to is the inferential strength of the argument that you're looking at. There's basically two types of logical arguments. Arguments that have a lot of strength. The conclusion follows with necessity. And I'll explain that in a minute, but strong logical arguments, the strongest, are called deductive. The conclusion follows with necessity. Inductive, the conclusion follows based on probability, and a good inductive argument would be a high degree of probability. Okay, so with that, let's start talking about it. Arguments, right here in the handout, can be divided into two groups. Deductive and inductive, and again, this is just referring to the strength of the inference. You have these premises, remember, the factual claims, then there's an inferential claim. These reasons, this set of facts implies this conclusion. Well, the strength of that implication, that inference, that's how you categorize whether it's deductive or inductive. Okay, deductive, let's read this here. A deductive argument. This is an argument where it is claimed that it is impossible for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. And here's something about the book. When the book says it's impossible for the conclusion to be false, another way of looking at it, it's impossible for the conclusion to be something other than it is. So if you say it's raining outside, that would be false if it's something other than that, which obviously is it's not raining outside. But that may help you at some times, because some arguments, if it's not structured right, it's possible that the conclusion can be what it's stating, but it also could be something else. And that tells you it's not really a strong deductive argument where everything is lined up right. If you have a good deductive argument where everything is lined up right, your inference is the way it's supposed to be, it has to be that conclusion. It can't be false or other than it is. And I'll revisit that a little bit later in other lectures. So let's continue reading. An argument where it is claimed that it is impossible for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. In such arguments, the conclusion is claimed to follow necessarily from the premises. Necessary reasoning is involved and the inferential strength is strong. In other words, the conclusion is claimed to follow from the premises with necessity. The arrangement of terms, given the truth of the terms, necessitates the conclusion. Okay, here would be an example. There's different kinds of deductive arguments, which I'm going to talk about in a minute here. But here would be one. Let's say you have, if it's raining outside, that'll be R, then, horseshoe means if then, okay? If it's raining outside, then the streets are wet. This little symbol is called a horseshoe operator, and we'll get into that later in the course. But if it's raining outside, then the streets will be wet. It is raining outside, therefore the streets are wet. That is a deductive argument where everything is lined up, and that conclusion follows with necessity. Because what it's saying, and you know, here it says, given the truth of the terms, for right now we're just assuming these terms, these premises are correct, and they are. If it is raining outside, we all know from life the streets are wet. So the second premise, it is raining outside, then the streets will be wet. Okay, that has to follow with necessity. If you have these two premises, if it's raining outside, then the streets will be wet. It is raining outside, therefore the streets are not wet. That won't work, right? So this conclusion, the streets are wet, follows with necessity. Okay? So that would be a deductive argument, this one right here. Okay, inductive argument. This is based on probability. The conclusion doesn't follow with necessity. This is an argument where it is claimed that it is improbable for the conclusion to be false given that the premises are true. The conclusion is claimed to follow probably from the evidence. Probabilistic reasoning is involved, which goes beyond what is certain about the premises. Okay? So a good inductive argument is the conclusion in all probability, a high degree of probability follows. Okay, and here's an example. Let's say, you know, you walk into a room and you say, you know, this building has been standing for a long time. I don't think the architects and the builders were on acid when they designed it and built the building. I think the roof is going to still stay up in the classroom while I'm in there. Okay? Well, that is inductive reasoning, and that would be a strong argument. This building has been standing for a long time. Buildings don't have their roofs cave in hardly ever. The architects weren't taking acid when they designed the building. The builders weren't taking acid when they built the building. Therefore, the roof is going to stay up in all probability. That would be an inductive argument. The reason it's based on probability, I suppose there is a chance you could walk into that room, sit down, and take a class, and while that class is going on, the roof could cave in. So that's why it doesn't follow with necessity, because roofs can fall. There's always a chance. But in this case, most classrooms, there's hardly any chance at all. But when you walk into the classroom, you're employing inductive reasoning. Now, one thing I do want to say about induction, this doesn't mean, oh, deductive arguments, the conclusion follows with necessity, they're very strong arguments, and inductive, well, they're not, you know, it's only based on probability, and they're much, much weaker. It is a weaker form of reasoning with inductive arguments, but we want to be careful. That doesn't mean that these arguments cannot be relied on. We make a lot of important decisions in our lives every day based on inductive reasoning. So just because you have an inductive argument doesn't mean you can't be certain of the things you conclude. You walk into a room and take a class based on inductive reasoning, and this is reasoning human beings have a high level of confidence in. Now, the more probability for the conclusion, the greater the confidence. But most of us don't make decisions based on inductive reasoning with conclusions that are weak or have a low degree of probability. But when you have a high degree of probability, inductive reasoning, we trust, it's very strong. And I just don't want you to forget that. Just because it's not deductive doesn't mean it's not a reliable form of reasoning, and which we have no confidence in trusting. We have great confidence in inductive reasoning, and you use it constantly every day of your lives. Okay? And by now you probably realize the difference between these two types of arguments lies in the strength, but this strength can be significant, okay? If you had a solid deductive argument that concluded miracles were impossible, that would actually be very threatening to those people on earth that believe miracles are possible. Let's say you really had a good argument, good premises, and the conclusion followed with 100% certainty. Well, that would make people who believe in miracles, they would have to really deal with that. It would be a much more formidable challenge. Now, the reality of life is there's very few deductive arguments talking about issues like miracles or other things that are very important that have been articulated. As an example, there has not been one deductive argument ever articulated by professional philosophers that shows with necessity miracles are impossible. If any of you listening could come up with an argument that's deductive, that where the conclusion is miracles are impossible, follows with necessity, if you ever could devise an argument like that, guess what? You'd win the Nobel Prize, and you would have the whole philosophic world beating a path to your door. Okay? And the issues with miracles, for example, we have a famous essay by David Hume. He was a philosopher, a British empiricist, and he had an argument against miracles, but it was inductive. And if it's inductive, that means his conclusion only follows probabilistically, and there are many people that think his conclusion doesn't follow with a high degree of probability. But if you have an inductive argument, it's not as much as a threat, because the conclusion is following based on probability, which leaves open with philosophical issues that the conclusion could be other than it is. But if you have an argument that's deductive, and it was a good argument, it would be much more of a formidable challenge. And my example here, just to repeat with miracles, the world doesn't have a deductive argument arguing that miracles are impossible. We have arguments saying they're unlikely, but they're inductive. Okay? And the difference between these two types of arguments lies in the strength of an argument's inferential claim. Okay? Deductive inductive is telling you how strong the conclusion follows from the premises, okay? With necessity or with a high degree of probability. Okay, so you're looking at an argument. You've already determined you do have an argument. You see the premises, you've identified them, you see the conclusion. Now you want to ask yourself, is this a deductive argument or is this an inductive one? And I'm going to give you 3 criteria to help you there. Look for those indicator words. If you see the words probably, improbable, likely, plausible, unlikely, etc., there's a good chance that that you're dealing with an inductive argument. You know, someone says this, therefore in all likelihood the roof is not going to cave in. That's an inductive argument, okay? That can help you. If you see words like necessary, certainly, absolutely, definitely, a lot of times that could tip you off. This is a deductive argument. But remember, like I said in the previous video, be careful. People can use words for rhetorical purposes. Someone could say it certainly follows that, using that for impact, or really conveying I feel strongly about that, and if you're on board with me, you will too. And they're not really meaning to put forward a deductive argument. So just always be careful, but often if you see these words, probable, necessary, certainly, likely, these can tip you off whether you're dealing with a deductive type argument or an inductive type argument. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Second criteria, the actual strength of the inferential link between premises and conclusion. Okay? So let's say you don't have these indicator words, but you get a feeling that this conclusion seems to follow with necessity. That's how the author means it to be. So here you're kind of just saying, what does the strength seem to be? Even without indicator words, sometimes you can pick this up. If the conclusion follows necessarily, it's clearly deductive. It is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false or other than it is. Okay? On the other hand, if the conclusion does not follow with strict necessity, but seems to follow probably, it's best to consider the argument inductive. And this often will become obvious if you already have the indicator words, but this will be more of a, you're going to have to make the call here. If you don't see these indicator words, often you'll see them both together. You'll see improbable, likely, probably, and you can tell they mean it to be a probabilistic strength. If you see these words, you'll get it confirmed because you'll see that they're arguing with necessity. Okay, what if there are no indicator words and the strength of the inferential claim is ambiguous? Sometimes it is ambiguous, and I want you to cut you guys some slack here. It doesn't mean you're not getting what's obvious. A lot of people who write can be ambiguous, and if it's ambiguous, maybe they're not clear enough. And if they're not clear enough, they should have been more clear, and because of their lack of clarity, that's how come you don't really know. There is a third criteria, okay? And the third criteria is look at the form or style of argumentation the arguer uses. Deductive arguments, they do settle into certain types of forms. So you may recognize the form and go, oh, now I know this is deductive. And inductive arguments can settle into their own certain types of forms or style, okay? So these can help you. So, deductive argument forms. Many arguments have a distinctive character or form that indicates that the premises are supposed to provide absolute support for the conclusion. So if you see an argument based on mathematics, this is an argument in which the conclusion depends on purely, arithmetic or geometric computation or measurement. It's deductive. If I say Sally's bringing 2 apples to the meeting and George is bringing 2 apples to the meeting, therefore there will be 4 apples at the meeting. Okay, that's deductive. All right, because you can see the math and the numbers. There are going to be 4 with necessity, providing they pull through in their promises. But 2 plus 2, if you have 2 plus 2 equals 4, this could be like you're concluding that. Premise 1 or reason 1, premise 2, it's deductive. Okay, an argument from definition. What if you have something like this? Al is an unmarried man, therefore Al is a bachelor. Okay? Now that is an argument from definition because all unmarried men are bachelors. That would be deductive. Al has to be a bachelor if he's an unmarried man. Okay. Syllogistic arguments, and we're going to be going into syllogisms a lot more in the course. Syllogisms are deductive in nature. And what a syllogism is, it's an argument, and let me erase those things up there just to clear this up. Okay, so we're right here now. A syllogism is an argument consisting of exactly 2 premises and 1 conclusion. Premise 1, premise 2, and you'll have a conclusion. And what these are nice, tidy type of deductive arguments, and you have terms, and they have a clarity and a simplicity where you can really see deduction in action. So I'm not going to belabor more about a syllogism right now, but if you see syllogistic arguments, they are deductive because they all depend on terms being used. It's like bones being lined up. Like, you remember when I said, if it's raining outside, then the streets are wet? It is raining outside, therefore the streets are wet. This is a syllogism, and if R then W, R therefore W, you have 2 premises, 1 conclusion, you have repeating terms. Just if you see stuff like that, you're dealing with deduction, and there are different kinds. There's categorical syllogisms, hypothetical syllogisms, which is what this one was. If it's raining outside, then streets are wet. That's a hypothetical. And disjunctive syllogism. I won't get into, like I said, the distinctives of those right now. But if you see terms being used from one premise to another to the conclusion, you're dealing with deductive arguments, because it's all playing on the arrangement of terms or the skeleton. Okay, there's a skeleton there, or I like to say the bones are lining up properly. We'll talk more about stuff like this, but if you see terms being used in something in the form of a syllogism, it's deductive. Okay? All right, let's go to inductive now. Inductive argument forms are such that you can see that probability is used to assert the conclusion or the content of the conclusion is in some way intending to go beyond the content of the premises. See, in deductive, you never go beyond what is given in the premises. But inductive, if I see 10 crows and if I see 10,000 crows and they're all black, and I say most likely all crows are black, or the next crow I'm going to see is black, well, you haven't seen the 10,001 crow, but you're making a judgment about that based on the 10,000. It's gone beyond. That would be inductive. Okay. So if you have any argument from analogy, analogy is you're comparing two things and you know certain things about both of them. They're similar in these areas, but there's something about one of the entities where you don't know anything about it yet. But you do know in that one area, you know that area about the other thing you're comparing. And based on what you know in that other thing, you go, you know, they're all similar in this way, so they're probably similar in this way as well. You're kind of taking a chance. So here's an example. The point is, if they're ever using analogies, it's inductive. It's based on probability. So if you see words like similarly, and I'm going to give you that example here in a minute. Similarly, similar, that's what analogy means. It means similarity. Then you're dealing with an analogy. They're comparing two things, and it's going to be inductive based on probability. Your book in 1.3 has an example. I'll read it. Christina's Porsche is a great handling car. It follows that Angela's Porsche must also be a great handling car. So you've never driven Angela's Porsche, but Christina's, let's say you've gotten into it, she's told you it handles great. Even if you go, well, it's a Porsche, Christina's car is a Porsche, Angela's is a Porsche. They both were made from the same factory. They both are the same model. I haven't driven Angela's Porsche, but based on the similarities, I'm going to make an analogy. Just as Christina's Porsche handles great, I betcha Angela's Porsche is going to handle great. That would be an inductive, and it's based on probability because you haven't gotten in Angela's Porsche. And let's say you didn't really know that it was made at the same factory. Maybe it could have been made at another factory and the workers made a mistake putting it together. Or even if it is at the same factory, you still don't know for sure that Angela's Porsche handles well. So it's based on an analogy, but you have a high degree of probability that it does, okay? But you still don't know for certain. So anytime analogies are used, inductive. An argument from generalization. Any argument that proceeds from the knowledge of a selected sample to some claim about the whole group is inductive. When I brought up the crows, if I've seen 10,000 crows, they're all black. My whole life I've seen crows, they're all black. And I say, therefore, all crows are black. That's inductive, because most likely all of them are. And the bigger your sample size, the more confidence you can feel about it, okay? Argument from authority. Any argument that concludes that something is true because a presumed expert or witness or tradition says that it is. A lot of times if you have an expert, you can trust him. But still, you don't know, that expert could make a mistake in the specific instance at hand, or maybe the person is fraudulent or dishonest or skewed their data. Even though it's from authority, there's always the chance the authority could be wrong. But we still use this a lot. Think of all the things you know, the things you read in a textbook. Are you able to verify everything you read in a textbook? No. We have to trust what other human beings have done in the past. We have to trust their experiments. I mean, someone could have made a textbook and lied about everything and made it up and felt that, well, I'm going to publish this on April Fool's and everything in it. These experiments never happened. I messed with the data. This person didn't exist. We believe that's always a possibility. That's why it's always going to be an inductive argument. But remember, induction doesn't mean it's reasoning we can't trust very much. We trust it all the time. We have a lot of confidence in it. But you always never know, okay? But most of what we believe is based on what humans have done in the past, and we trust it. But anytime an authority is used, it's inductive. Okay, an argument based on signs is always going to be inductive. If you're going up a road and it says, switchbacks. I don't know what that thing is when you're going up a mountain road and it says switchbacks. Most likely switchbacks are ahead. But what if some teenagers the night before took down the sign that said speed limit 75 because you're getting out of the mountains and now it's a straightaway, and they put that switchback thing there. So you see this squiggly little thing, switchbacks coming, and it's a straightaway. Anytime you have a sign that points to a reality that the sign is symbolizing, and traffic signs are a great example, it's still inductive because you don't know, okay? You're trusting the sign points to reality. What if someone has a sign and it says speed limit 75, and teenagers the night before took down the sign that said 10 miles an hour and then it had a switchback? So there really are switchbacks and not a straightaway where the speed limit should be 75. So I reversed the example to show you. Signs, an argument that proceeds from the knowledge of a sign to a claim about the thing or situation that the sign symbolizes, always inductive. And then if you have causal inference, an argument that proceeds from knowledge of a cause to a claim about an effect, or from knowledge of an effect to a claim about a cause, cause-effect arguments are always inductive, okay? And here's an example. You know those movies about these class action lawsuits against a chemical company? Cancer rates have increased in this town a little above the national average. Well, we think it's because of the chemical factory 5 miles up the river. Well, it could be the chemical factory dumping stuff in that have caused that, but it also could be something else. Maybe when these cancer rates started coming up, there were new products from a different distributor the local supermarket was using. And you know how when you're trying to sue a chemical company and blaming them for your health issues, these are not easy cases to win, because the attorneys for the chemical company could say, you're assuming it's our factory that's doing this, and we have safety protocols in place, but we can't rule out that something else caused that. You see how it's not deductive in nature. These cases are hard to win, the class action lawsuit from the people in the town, let's say, because they're inductive in nature. Okay, we're done with this, but just to review, if you're looking at an argument, you're going, is it deductive or inductive? You want to keep the 3 criteria in mind. Do you see deductive or inductive indicator words? What is your sense when you're looking at the inferential strength between the premises and the conclusion? And if that's not enough, the third is look at the forms. If it's based on math, a definition, syllogism, it's deductive. Those are deductive forms. If it's analogy, generalizations based on sign, authority, cause and effect, those are inductive. Okay, that should keep you busy for a while.